how delighted am I that we are finally getting together with you, Deirdre, on the Leaders Who Care series, because I've only told a few other people this. How can we have a Leaders Who Care series if we don't have Deirdre on it? I mean, geez.
Thank you. Well, I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm glad we could make this work.
Yeah, me too. So welcome again. Why don't we start by, if you could just briefly introduce yourself. Don't tell the whole story because then we'll be done really quick. Type of thing. Or I won't have a chance to ask another question. Just share a little bit about you, family, maybe something really personal that no one knows and stuff like that. So what do you think? Then we'll chat.
So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Deirdre White. I'm the CEO of an organization called Pixera Global. Something that no one knows. I tend to maybe overshare sometimes, so I'm not sure how much there is that no one knows, but probably there's things that some of your audience doesn't know. So you had asked the question of me earlier of how I came to be a leader who cares.
Well, you're already going into the questions. We haven't even got there yet.
Oh, I thought that's what you were asking me.
No, just tell us about you, family, where you came from.
Well, I was going to tell you about family as part of how I became to be a leader who cares. So
Okay.
I'm preempting your question or you're preempting mine. No, so my family, that's the part that maybe is not so familiar to many people about me, is that I really, not to be trite that it's because of my parents that I got into this space, but it absolutely is. My parents were both sort of serial do-gooders. And when my older brother was 2 years old and I was 2 months old, they moved us to Ouagadougou. It was then Upper Volta, what's now Burkina Faso, because they had signed on to be part of the global campaign for smallpox eradication.
Oh, wow.
So I spent much of I guess my entire infanthood in West Africa. And, in the wake of that, I think because of that experience they had, and by the way, going back to my family, my parents were, they were both from really small towns, kind of insular places. So how they had this global mindedness and this thirst for equity, I think I still don't understand to this date. They really sort of fed it to us from our early childhood. And yeah, so that's part of my background story that I'm really proud of, and that I think has been absolutely formative in who I am as a person. And as for me today, I am married and I have 3 kids. I have 3 kids and a stepchild, all of whom are very globally minded themselves, which is nice to see how that kind of transfers from generation to generation.
It is, and it's fascinating what you say, because there was no internet, there was not a lot of information to be got by them, and yet they still knew that it was something they had to go for.
Yeah, I marvel. I think a lot of times it's utterly unsurprising that I'm the person that I am. If you knew my parents or knew anything about them, I'm always surprised that they were the people they were. And that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, is what was so formative for them in their journeys. And same thing, my children, it's not surprising that they see the world the way they do. They grew up in this household. So interesting to contemplate. Someday I'm going to write a book.
Well, we're in LA, we do movies here, so I mean, based on books. So
Exactly.
we'll talk. Uh, so that is super fascinating, and as you said, you're clearly a global citizen from, sounds like, early on. So before we delve into deeper about all that, share with us your why, or what I prefer to ask is, like, why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I think that for the globally focused piece of it, a lot of it comes from, again, being raised in a household where I never knew who was going to be at our dinner table. In fact, I didn't know who was going to be staying on our couch for a day or a week or a year, but they were going to be someone interesting from another place that I was going to learn a lot from. It was just always a surprise, and I think that, you know, growing up surrounded by people who had such different life experiences,
Right.
just always made me want to know more. It made me want to go and see and touch. And then I think when you go and you see the world, then you can't help but also reflect on the inequities as you get further out of your comfort zone. So I really think this too just goes so much back to that childhood experience of being surrounded by such interesting and diverse folks.
Yeah, isn't that an amazing gift that your parents just did? There wasn't like they just knew that it was, or she did, they embraced it and enjoyed it, whatever words you want to use. That you have no choice but to love all the stuff going on, differences and similarities and language and I mean all that. So that's actually spectacular. So where did the interest come from to study Russian and Soviet studies at the University of Pennsylvania?
Well, so, you know, probably again, tied back to the same thing. I was always interested in languages and communication barriers and how we can be better at understanding different people from different experiences. And always wanted to learn other languages. I first decided to take French because my parents, when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about at the dinner table, they spoke French. So I take that one on early, make sure that I could deconstruct all of their secrets. And then, you know, I thought more about sort of other languages and other places. And this is the 1980s. The Soviet Union is very much the evil empire in how it's described to us. And I just didn't buy that story. I just knew that that it was much more complex than that. And I wanted to go and I wanted to see the Soviet Union for myself. And I wanted to be able to understand and talk with people and see what their lives and experiences were. So I applied to the University of Pennsylvania. They had a really good Russian studies program at the time and some really top-notch professors, not just in language, but in history and culture of both Russia and the Soviet Union. So it was an incredible experience, and it led me to go to be a student in the Soviet Union in both what was then Leningrad and in Moscow back in 1987. And you know, to say that it was a life-changing experience is the understatement of my life, probably.
No, I would think so. I actually have relatives in Ukraine that I've not met actually, and I'm really dying to go. But I would think that your overall experience in international trade, but especially in the post privatization part, and I had friends that had gone from Deloitte. I was at Deloitte to Moscow as part of this whole capitalistic, you know, post privatization thing, and but that knowledge, that experience must have really shaped your perspectives and knowledge of business in general, no?
Well, it'll be interesting to compare notes with some of your friends. It absolutely shaped my knowledge of business. It absolutely shaped my approach, and I guess the approach of my whole team. Anyone that I had the honor to work with over the years, all of our approaches to sort of international development, because my reflecting back on that experience working in post-privatization restructuring, I'm ashamed of some of the work that I did, quite frankly. I think that much of the work that was done in Russia and the other countries of the former Soviet Union at the time was poorly designed, bordering on negligent, if not fully negligent. And really came from an almost colonial perspective of, we in the West know how to do it better. We're going to come in and, you know, here's your your die cut solution to a really challenging problem. There was no sort of co-creation of solutions. There was no really taking into account the really important human factors in that privatization scheme. And I think if you look at so many of the challenges that Russia faces today, and some of the other countries of the FSU as well, but so many of the challenges that Russia faces today and that the US faces in our relationship with Russia today, a lot of it comes down to really poorly designed interventions that utterly lacked real deep partnerships in the way that we did that work. I'm very sorry to say, but I believe that and have seen it with all, with all of my experience and with all of my heart and soul.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more, because I've also been fortunate enough to travel around the world and work for a global leadership development organization, and I remember reading a book of the founder of Tostan. You familiar with Tostan? It's an organization that fight for women's health, and especially towards the stopping of the mutilation of women, the cutting of women. Long story short, she talked about even the women wanted to keep doing it because there was so much tradition. They couldn't just come in and tell them, you need to do this. You had to get trust, no kidding. And you had to, have them buy into why this is happening. To me, it's not rocket science. I learned that in the sports, actually, that, the coach gets the team, the stars, the regular players want to buy in, and then we have a championship chance, versus this is how you're doing it, period. And that's an issue we have here about telling other people how to do it. And so it's like, I can totally get it, and it never works.
Yeah, and there's a total reason we get along, Mark, because I think we see the world that same way. And we don't even at my organization at Pixar Global, we don't even talk about the development field, even though a lot of people would say that that's the space we're in. But words matter, and development in and of itself can have this sort of condescending sense to it, that you're underdeveloped, so you need these magical solutions. So we really talk about engagement. And that everything we're about is engagement for mutual and meaningful benefit.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the way to go. There's studies I've read forever, I'm sure you've seen it. The number one thing after food and air that we need, that fills our hearts and souls, is belonging. And if you're told this is how you do it, then you're not really belonging. You're
Amen.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So it's taken capitalization. It's taken decades for corporates and family offices and whatnot to recognize that aligning with social impact is actually good for business, and it's definitely good for attracting the best people so your business does thrive. You've engaged in social entrepreneurship, global citizenship, partnerships. Probably easier to say what you haven't been engaged in, actually. And a lot of times pretty unique entities from what I remember seeing. So how did that all evolve for you? Did you recognize along the way that that you are a leader who cares, type of thing?
I don't think I came to that realization until even much more recently, to tell you the truth. I will say a few things interesting about how that evolved. First of all, if you had met me back when I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, you would be very surprised, as are many of my friends from those days, to find me deep in partnerships with major corporations, because that was not the path most people thought I was going to go. I think I was really of the sort of business is the problem in the world mindset. And one thing I learned over a number of years, I guess in my 20s, is the role that business can play for good. And I learned that partially not just in my work in Russia, but really being involved in anti-apartheid campaigns, throughout the 80s and the very early 90s. So really kind of thinking about how you harness business for good was something that came into my head quite a bit, and I was able to see where that worked well. But, as far as how the field has evolved, I think Pixar Global really was one of the pioneers of deep partnerships between NGOs and the private sector, going back a decade and a half now. A lot of nonprofits were always happy to take a big check from a corporation, but not so much to walk down the street hand in hand together and say we're in this together. So that's a space that I think we were more accepting of really early. And I think the other thing that's kind of part of this evolution to leaders who care is that we also really were. It 15 years ago doesn't seem early, but early in this phase, we were early in the recognition that it's okay for, not just okay for, but it's probably good for business to profit off of the social impact work that we're doing together. That leaders who care can do good for the world and can make money at the same time. And then in fact, altruism is great. But it's generally short-lived. And so for me, working with companies that see a business upside into our work together, I know they're going to continue to do the work because it's strategic and it makes sense. And so I think you can kind of come to this leaders who care space from different ways. You can come from the sort of serial do-gooder space in the beginning, or you can come from the hardcore business first perspective, but hey, there's social issues that are material to my business and I'm going to have to pay attention and think about these things differently. I don't care which way you get there, as long as you get there. The other thing I would say about this is I think that a lot of business leaders have gotten there by hook or by crook. And what's unfortunate is I think that the public sector and the social sector are a little slower to get there. They still haven't really gotten their minds around separating sort of philanthropy and good for the sake of good from a business proposition. I think it's changing. I think it's changing faster on the business leadership side than it is on the public and nonprofit leadership side. So that's a space we need to work on.
No, that's it's pretty clear. And that's why I think it's the business leaders who do care that are gonna make maybe the biggest impact right now. And it's interesting that you say that, because along my whole career of leadership development, engagement, and executive search and all about talent, I've had conversations for years with executives of why aren't we getting this talent? Why isn't this happening? Why aren't they performing? It always came back to, well, how do we care more about them, like a sports team, so they'll perform? And so they kind of knew. I've had clients say, well, maybe we'll give them an extra sick day or two in a treadmill, and I look at them like, really? That's what you're going to do? Whereas other clients, like a rider, built a daycare center at their world headquarters, and it was a business decision that they saw actually made them feel good. Interesting enough.
Yeah.
And it was, so it developed up to now, and I think we're in an era where we've got a lot of opportunity. Pandemic was a hit, but there's other things that positively can come from that. About that, like you said, you can't, if you do good, your business can do even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just can do even better. I mean, in some cases, it's a case of just survival. Some of these big problems in the commons that we're facing, if business doesn't take them on and make meaningful contributions there, they're not going to survive this in the long term either. It's not just that they're not going to do better; they may not survive. And I think we just need to really get more people recognizing that across all layers of the corporate world, and again, the public sector and the social sector as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I had a conversation with an executive about, I've had this for a long time. I never understood, I understand quarterly results. I'm a CPA in the past, but quarterly results are like 1 second. And one guy said to me, I do care, and I believe them, but the minute I'm finished with these quarterly results, I'm worried about the next ones right away. And there's got to be this is a different discussion, but there's got to be some kind of change there as well. First of all, we're not thinking long-term enough at all. And secondly, 3 months is nothing. And if that's all you're working on, it's just numbers. It's ridiculous. So that's a big topic, and one I'd like to see them change. Somebody change that to different things.
Completely agree with you there. Quarterlies are useless in terms of really thinking about what the world is going to look like a few years down the line, let alone even a few months down the line, as we're learning so quickly this year.
And to tell you the truth, even if you put the social aside, business-wise, it's not even a good idea.
Yeah.
I know they said it was good to evaluate. Sure, you can evaluate, but you don't have to be hung up on the business results every single quarter. So you talked about Russia. So my grandparents were from Kiev on my mother's side, and they would always say with the accent, they would say, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. And then education was number two. And it wasn't a slogan or a branding or whatever. It was real life. They knew what was important. So we got COVID. We got technology going super fast still. We've got wildfires and floods. We've got racial justice. And I'm going to put a timing on this video because the court verdict is coming out right now, I understand, on the George Floyd thing. So cross your fingers. And so with all that said, economic, social impact, etc., do you, with all your interaction, engagement with people, do you see, if you will, an awakening of what's really important?
So I would give a partial answer to that. I hope I do. And I'm one of the world's largest optimists generally. I certainly have seen so many positive signs. But I still worry because, we hear a lot of language about going back to normal. And, God, I hope we don't go back to normal. I hope we don't go back to really thinking that the inequitable world in which we were living before that is the best that we can do. I see lots of people with new ideas and new energy. I see some things changing. But I do worry that as things start to open up, that we may just shift back to normal on one too many fronts. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about that as an organization is, how do we ensure that doesn't happen, or what's not how do we ensure we're sort of a small player in this, but what's our part in ensuring that we don't accept the old normal as what we're going back to, or what we're moving forward to.
Yeah, it's always easier not making a decision, but it's usually not a good decision. And so I think you're right. Our memories are short, and we just can't get lazy.
Really short.
Yeah, you've got to really love that. I don't know who's sleeping on my couch tonight, but he seems like a good guy. To your other point, right?
Exactly.
And embrace it. So I think that's really well said. So what do you think about the responsibility is then for business leaders who care, if you will, to ensure that their talent, their people, their well-being, financial, physical, mental, spiritual, altogether well-being is taken care of, in terms of that it is good for business, and it obviously flows right into the community?
One of the things that I think, maybe this was something that I already did to some extent, but I would say that this year has very much honed in terms of how and how often I do it, is to invite and participate in really hard conversations. And really, asking people how they are and really wanting to know the answer, even when the answer is not the usual, I'm fine. And we've done a lot of that this year as an organization, both big open organization-wide conversations, and then, lots of individual checking in on one another. This is related to, to COVID, to people's health well-being, to their financial being, everything else. And then certainly to all of the many issues that have been so clear around white supremacy, around hatred toward Black and Brown and Asian communities, that having those conversations openly within the organization and being prepared to hear the responses and think about how we're going to act differently is something that's important. We've also made a commitment as an organization to having those hard conversations with our clients and partners, which is a really difficult thing to do. And that means being vulnerable and being open to vulnerability, to other people's vulnerability, and that really is a gift in so many ways, because you can learn so much, and there's so much you can do as a leader who cares if you actually know the things that are keeping people up at night, because I think we don't ask those questions often enough. And sometimes there's the simplest things you can do that are, that are low or no cost, but that contribute immensely to people's well-being. And I think it's incumbent upon all leaders to do more of that, and also to set that example for their whole teams, so that all the people they work with are doing that kind of outreach and are prepared to have those more difficult conversations and uncomfortable conversations.
Which as results sometimes end up being less uncomfortable than you thought, even though they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's been a big learning from this year too, is sort of the trepidation with which you walk into some conversations, particularly when you're moving toward a solution for something that's better for everyone. Turns out it takes a lot of the weight off that. You're absolutely right.
I had one executive tell me, I am so much happier being a CEO that doesn't have to have all the answers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I just go down to my factory and I ask Joe over there, what's happening with this type of thing. And he's just so much more relaxed. And, in sports, you get psyched up for the game, but that you have to know how to relax to play the game, because you can't perform if you're too tight and psyched up. It's not much different. If you're too tight about the uncomfortable conversation, it's fine to be nervous if it's the right type of nervous, but you can be okay with that and have it, and it's authentic, and people love when they see that you're feeling something, and it really works. To me, it's not even rocket science. I know it's human beings. It's not rocket science.
But we were taught, at least in this country, and certainly my generation is, don't talk about race, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics. 3 things that are always talked about at the table in my house, but which were sort of taboo in the office place, except for with the sort of handpicked group of people that you knew that was safe. But the fact that we're having the kind of conversations, that we're having, particularly around white supremacy and around, our own organization's role in that, and, how we contribute to and or benefit from structural racism. Those are conversations that 2 years ago we could not have had in the way that we can now. And so, when you talk about some good things that have come out of this year, that's one of the really important things, is that I think we're all a lot more open to the hard conversations.
I don't know about you, but I was having them before. I didn't care. I put it out there, and more women clients, I don't even know if I should say this, we're still recording, more women clients would talk to me, not heavy duty, but they mentioned sex to me in on phone call or whatnot, just to see how I reacted, type of thing. And it was like, it was hilarious. But it's I understand what you're saying, and we've got to be vulnerable, and I love what you're saying about understand other people's vulnerability too. Everybody has lives, and maybe something happened that morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though they say they're fine, I'll give you one last thing. One of the top people in one of the major banks in the world told me he has his managers go see their people every morning, and even if it's for 30 seconds, not just say hello from the door, but sit down in the chair in their office.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be long. It could be 20 seconds, but they saw you sit in the chair and say, how you doing?
Yeah.
and it made all the difference in the world that they cared. So, you know,
Absolutely.
so 2020, crazy year plus. What are you most grateful for as we head towards the rest of 2021?
Look, there's, you know, as awful in so many ways and traumatic and everything as this past year has been, there just is a ton to be grateful for. Certainly, I have been in a position of privilege along with my family to weather so many of these storms. You know, with our health intact, with our finances intact, you know, all of those things. So, you know, of course, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for my family and their flexibility. But I'd be really remiss if I didn't say how incredibly grateful I am for the amazing team I work with at Pixar Global, because they've gone through the most unbelievably uncertain year of their lives, not just with everything that was going on around, but just even the challenges the company faced this year. And you know, they didn't slow down for a minute. They were committed to the good they were doing for the world, and they just they dug in. They were incredibly creative and flexible and understanding and vulnerable. You know, and all of those things. So I wake up every morning so grateful, because I do get to work with the best people on the face of the planet, and they are so committed to not going back to that normal, and to a world that is just much better. So I would have to, I would have to answer that with gratitude for my team.
It's a great answer, and that's because they don't have jobs.
They don't.
You know, they
Yeah,
love what they do, and so
yeah.
it's a big
And
difference.
I love what I do, and I recognize how fortunate I am in
Well, as Demi Moore said in Ghost, ditto. Um, so I'm
that.
grateful for you and all you do, and thank you for being one of the leaders who care, and being on our series.
Thanks so much, Mark, and really grateful for the partnership with you as well. It's been a lot of fun to date, and I know there's a lot more good things to come.
You better believe it. Thanks.
All right.